And here we are, our second remote Skype session podcast. Tim, how's it going over there?
Actually, well, look, things are about the same as they were the last time we spoke with our, I think we're calling it physical distancing now, as opposed to social distancing.
Oh.
The numbers are the numbers, and I feel about it the way I felt about it then. It'll be okay.
Well, we're calling it physical distancing now? Is that it?
Yeah.
See, I was going to nickname it SODIS. I was just going to do like hashtag SODIS. How's your SODIS going? They're switching it up on me, man. That sucks. So, there's really nothing to talk about. Movies are getting canceled. Sony just pushed their entire summer slate off to next year.
Yeah.
That's kind of insane.
Interesting that they did that, though, rather than get selective about it.
Yeah.
And say, look, some of these things we're gonna push over to one of the various streaming services, because some other folks are doing that. But no, they just took the whole thing and moved it over 1 year.
It's crazy.
We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the Olympics have been pushed off, so Sony has to feel like they're going to be able to compete with the Olympics, I guess. I don't know how that's all going to work, because they had stuff scheduled for next year as well.
I don't know what this magical 1 year thing is either. No one's been able. I mean, I get it. This will all go away eventually. I don't know why a year.
Well, I think because
magically number.
I think because they feel like the timetable for a vaccine will be there. I mean, if you talk to professionals, they all kind of have different opinions about it. But the people who are saying, look, we could have a vaccine as early as December or November. Mm-hmm. But more realistically, we would have a vaccine by next February.
Yeah. Interesting. Look. I don't want to play historian.
Yeah.
Except technically, I can play historian because I have to do history. But we will remember that 1917 flu, bad, went away.
Yep.
Came back in the fall. Made a mess in the fall. Of 1917. So, these things have a way of doing that. Hopefully we'll just, be vigilant and take care of it and make it go away forever eventually.
Well, we're going to start off. We're going to dive right in. I've got a whole bunch of Kino titles here from their Studio Classics line. You know what? This stuff is not on streaming. This stuff is not anywhere. This stuff is only on Blu-ray. And if you want to watch any of these spectacular movies, then you just got to dive in and order them. And Kino just has some of the best stuff these days. Right off the bat, we've been talking about a lot of Ernst Lubitsch stuff, and Kino has Bluebeard's Eighth Wife out now with Claudette Colbert and Gary Cooper. From 1938, really one of the most enjoyable Ernst Lubitsch movies imaginable, and for a very good reason, because it was written by Charles Brackett and Billy Wilder. Ernst Lubitsch and Billy Wilder, it just doesn't get better. And one of the things that I've been doing lately at watching Criterion Channel, been watching a lot of Billy Wilder interview footage with Dick Cavett in particular, and then also reading some Billy Wilder interviews online. And he always had a sign in his office that said, "What would Lubitsch do?" That was how he sort of inspired himself, because Lubitsch. It's funny. He says that for some reason Lubitsch always got his great ideas on the can. That he and Brackett would be sitting around and brainstorming with Lubitsch, and Lubitsch would say, "Give me a second," and he'd go to the head, and he'd sit on the toilet for 10 minutes, and then he'd come back and he'd say, "I've got it," and suddenly he'd lecture them. He'd give them a 15-minute long, he'd come up with these amazing ideas just sitting on the toilet. It's the funniest thing in the world. So anyway. Bluebeard's Eighth Wife really is a terrific film. Has wonderful supporting performances, too, by Edward Everett Horton and David Niven, of all people. But the combination of Billy Wilder, Charles Brackett, and Ernst Lubitsch is just incomparable. And then you throw Gary Cooper and Claudette Colbert into the mix. You have one of the all-time great romantic comedies ever made. And, of course, the concept here is a very risque at the time, set in France over the idea of a man who has been married many times, and Claudette Colbert is likely to be his eighth, and it's in 1938 that was a bit of a thing. So anyway, the very, very fun movie. Also worth mentioning is a movie that was really maligned at the time. Force 10 from Navarone. Kind of a semi-sequel to The Guns of Navarone, based on the Alistair MacLean novel. And directed by Guy Hamilton, of course, is a legendary James Bond director, with a terrific cast. Harrison Ford, very, very young here, just kind of just off of Star Wars, trying to sort of do something a little novel. And Robert Shaw. And I remember seeing this several times, not because I wanted to see Force 10 from Navarone, but because I really wanted to see Jaguar Lives with Joe Louis.
Yeah,
the Joe Louis who is mocked by Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if you remember that line, where Quentin has Bruce talking about all of his inspirations, and he says, Joe Louis, the boxer, not that white kickboxer, you know, and he makes fun of him. And it's funny because I always forget that Joe Louis, Lewis, was a contemporary of Bruce Lee. But he started his film career later and made a couple of movies. One of them was Jaguar Lives, which was I thought was a terrific film. And it was a double feature, and I wanted to get my money's worth every time I saw Jaguar Lives, so I had to sit through Force 10 from Navarone first.
You know what I got Force 10 from Navarone? Carl Weathers is in that movie.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, man. It's fantastic. Yeah, young Carl, young Harrison. Yeah, whole bunch of cats. Yeah.
Franco Nero, Barbara Bach, Edward Fox was in it as well. Yeah. And it's funny now looking back, I had no idea Sam Arkoff produced this damn thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, kind of a terrible movie though. So.
It really is. But you know what? You know what? We have fun with it anyway.
Yes.
It's amazing under current special effects standards when you look at the dam break at the end. I knew that was a miniature at the time, and that I was watching slow motion of a dam that was probably about 16 inches high. But you look at it now, it's laughable. Yeah. It's really laughable. CG would be so much better. The great French director René Clair had a Hollywood career for a moment and made some really interesting stuff. And one of those films was The Flame of New Orleans, starring Marlene Dietrich. Flame of New Orleans was made in 1941 and is really a pretty great Marlene Dietrich vehicle. Dietrich's German career and her Hollywood career are really a subject of a lot of debate, but it's very interesting. This takes place in the 18th century. This is pre-Louisiana Purchase, so this is French era New Orleans. And she plays a countess who wants to, marry a rich guy when she arrives in New Orleans. And it's a really, really smart film. It's well written by Norman Krasna, terrific screenwriter from the day. And it has an audio commentary by Lee Gambin and Rutanya Alda. So it's good stuff on that. We have also got Indiscretion of an American Wife, a Vittorio De Sica film with Jennifer Jones and Montgomery Clift. I had forgotten, you're a big De Sica guy, I'd forgotten that De Sica actually had a moment in Hollywood.
Yeah, fantastic. The 1958 film, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
53?
No,
it's 53. 53.
Fantastic.
And with dialogue by Truman Capote. That's just I had no idea. It's like these things come in and I'm like, holy cow, are you kidding me?
Jennifer Jones and Montgomery Clift before the accident.
Yes, when his face was so beautiful.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it is not among De Sica's best, but it's interesting. He steps into the Hollywood style very, very nicely, and it's a wonderful romance. It's a really, really solid film, and for De Sica fans, it's a really interesting contrast to things like Bicycle Thieves.
Yeah. Well, that neorealism of all of that. Not here. This is a film.
No, that's it.
He's made in the Hollywood style. Yes.
In the Hollywood style.
Yeah.
Ruben Mamoulian, the man who directed the first ever Technicolor film with Becky Sharp, the first ever 3-strip Technicolor, most accurately, directed a movie also with Marlene Dietrich called The Song of Songs, and that was in 1933. It is a pre-code film, and it is. It's a little bit sentimental for my taste. It really, really kind of goes very, very deep into the melodrama. It's a little bit dated, but as an artifact of history, I found it really, really quite interesting. The Dietrich. It's basically a period tearjerker, is what it is, and has all of the usual tragic twists and turns in it. But it's got a very, very compelling cast. In addition to Marlene Dietrich, it's got Lionel Atwill and Alison Skipworth. Brian Ahern is the big co-star. So that's worth checking out if you're a Dietrich fan. Mickey Spillane's My Gun is Quick. It's so good. Stars Robert Bray as Mike Hammer, one of the dozen or so people who played Mike Hammer. We're accustomed to the Mike Hammer TV incarnation, but these earlier films, the 50s era stuff that is like actually set in the era when these stories were originally written, pretty great stuff. And I'm not overly familiar with Robert Bray as an actor. He was kind of a B-level guy, but man. And director as well, George White. These are not people that were ever on my A-list, but made in 1957. Really good, hard-boiled noir, made for a kind of a $1.50, and a lot of great supporting performances here too from people that I'm only barely aware of. Don Randolph, Fred Essler. It's a good, solid movie.
Yeah, look, that movie was wickedly prostitutes and
oh yeah,
I mean, it's just the darkest stuff you could possibly think of in these movies, and they were wicked cool. And you gotta love that title, My Gun is Quick.
it's too cool. Return from the Ashes, directed by J. Lee Thompson, who did a lot of good, solid kind of semi-noirs at the time. This is from '65. It's a little bit late for a noir, but this is kind of a dramatic noir in some respects. Anyway, written by Julius Epstein, Casablanca co-writer, and it takes place in Paris just before World War II, where there's this Jewish doctor played by Ingrid Thulin, who marries a chess master played by Maximilian Schell. And what happens thereafter is all World War II related. I won't give any of it away, but it creates all kinds of really, really interesting, very noirish, Hitchcockian twists and turns that are very, very impressive. Herbert Lom is in this, so Samantha Egger, the wonderful Samantha Egger. But really, ultimately, it's a great bit for Maximilian Schell and for Ingrid Thulin.
I dug that movie, dude.
Cool.
Jay Lee. Speaking of Guns of Navarone.
Yeah.
That's Jay Lee.
Yeah.
And a bunch of those Planet of the Apes movies. I don't remember which ones, but 2 or 3 of those Planet of the Apes movies Jay Lee knocked out.
He did. He was a craftsman. He knocked them out, and just workmanlike, right?
Yeah, man.
John Saxon. We love John Saxon because
we still love John Saxon.
Oh man, John Saxon was in every cheesy thing ever made, and somehow he just owned it. I mean, you put John Saxon in the worst piece of junk ever, and somehow he makes you believe. I don't know how he does it. I just don't know how he does it. But anyway, John Saxon, one of the best things, apart from Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, starred in Cannibal Apocalypse. I don't even need to tell you what this movie's about. This is one of the great titles of all time. This is one of those Italian schlocky films from 1980. Sort of a semi-giallo film. It's gory, it's cheap, it's bad. But you know what? Right about now, with this coronavirus thing, it's kind of prescient. We got a double feature here of The Captain's Paradise by Anthony Kimmins and Barnacle Bill directed by Charles Friend. These are both Alec Guinness movies. They are Alec Guinness being silly and funny, which he did constantly in his British films before he became super, super serious in Hollywood movies. What's interesting is Barnacle Bill was made the same year as Bridge on the River Kwai. Oh. And it's a very, very different character. It's, he plays a, Man in the White Suit is sort of where he started his comedic career. And this sort of is a little bit similar to that. This is about a guy who is, he's trying to be a seaman in his family's tradition. The problem is, a good naval man, a big naval officer, the problem is he gets seasick. Comedy writes itself. And then The Captain's Paradise is kind of it's almost like a Bob Hope movie, to be honest. It takes place on Gibraltar, and he plays a guy. Oh, I don't want to give anything away. Let's just say it's almost like a Bob Hope movie crossed with a Don Knotts movie. starring Alec Guinness. And let me tell you, Celia Johnson and Yvonne DiCarlo as the co-leads are both terrific, and that is so unusual. Celia Johnson is such a serious British actress, and Yvonne De Carlo we all identify as Lily Munster, but they're both terrific. Also, Agatha Christie's Endless Night, with an unbelievable score by Bernard Herrmann. Really, just a fantastic score. This was directed and written by Sidney Gilliat in 1972. It's not one of the better known Agatha Christie's, but it's fine. It's perfectly adequate. But really, what makes it is Bernard Herrmann's music. Haley Mills is the star, an older Haley Mills. She's not a little girl anymore. She's kind of trying to go big, and it's spooky, but it feels like a movie from 1972.
A perfect Britt Eklund is in that movie, if I recall.
Oh, yes, she is.
Yeah.
Also, Giuseppe Tornatore's A Pure Formality. I'm so thrilled that this is on Blu-ray. This went nowhere. Tornatore made this right after he made Cinema Paradiso, and it went nowhere. It just kind of died. And basically, it's a two-hander. It's Gerard Depardieu and Roman Polanski in a room. It's basically a cop interrogating a guy. That's pretty much the entire movie. And but it's amazing because both actors are just at their absolute peak. Polanski, as an actor, not a filmmaker, really has a whole different dimension to him. He's very impressive here.
Reviewed that movie back in '74, gave it a good review. I think that's probably writing for box. I think we're both probably writing for box office back then. And it was a very odd sort of turn for him, Giuseppe. And after Cinema Paradiso, and just boom, nothing.
And I think because it is all in one room and it's two actors, a lot of people sort of revolted against it. But it's so good and it's such a great twist at the end. It's just really it's a smart film. Orson Welles and Jeff Chandler in Man in the Shadow from 1957. Kind of a standard 50s era Western. Jack Arnold, real kind of a journeyman director. This is a cool audio commentary from Troy Howarth, who contextualizes the film and puts it in its proper place. But man, what a good artifact from the period. Orson Welles is, it's not. I mean, it's not great. It's a little bit like a Western era noir, and Orson Welles is, he's heavy, literally physically heavy, and he plays a heavy, and it's all good. Written, by the way, by Gene L. Coon, one of the legendary writers of Star Trek.
Yeah. Orson seems like he was working out some stuff that would pop up in Touch of Evil a few years later when he actually could direct and more or less kind of play the same guy in a certain sort of way.
We got some more Westerns here. I'll make quick work of these. The Rare Breed, Night Passage, and Canyon Passage are these three. James Stewart stars in The Rare Breed and Night Passage, and then Night Passage and Canyon Passage have absolutely nothing in common other than the title Passage. That's really all they've got. But my favorite of these is The Rare Breed. It's you just can't go wrong with James Stewart and Maureen O'Hara, and then Brian Keith of all people does brings up the rear. But Maureen O'Hara and James Stewart, that's just a lot of star power there. Directed by Andrew McLaughlin, who did tons of westerns in this period, and it's just beautiful. It's nice, wonderful, widescreen, full color, Technicolor, epic western filmmaking from 1966. It's about selling a bull at an auction and livestock. It's a livestock western. The livestock westerns always center around cattle runs and rodeos, and if the animals play as big of a part as any person. But
bunch of familiar faces in that. You got your Jack Elam, you got your Harry Carey Jr., you got even young Juliette Mills.
Juliette Mills again.
Beautiful.
Yep. And then Night Passage is James Stewart and Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy never really could act, but because he was a war hero, people just kept putting him in movies, and he's not even very good playing himself in the Audie Murphy story, to be honest. But it's fine. James Stewart kind of puts him on his back and carries him. Dan Duryea, who's always the second or third guy in all these westerns, shows up just to remind you that it's a western. And, directed by James Nielsen. Not a real impressive guy, but it has a great Dmitry Tiomkin score that kind of makes you feel it's super big and west. And historian Toby Rohn of the Rohn Group does the audio commentary and gives this a nice little sense of context as well. So it's good. It's got gunslingers and train bandits and the whole thing, and it's a western. It's just a straightforward.
Here comes Jack Elam again.
I know.
These guys. I mean, it was a bit of a cottage industry, some of
Jack,
these guys. Sometimes they didn't even change their clothes.
Jack Elam and Dan Duryea, I swear they're in like every single one of these movies. Those guys made hundreds of westerns, and they're always playing the same part. You're right.
I every time.
You wear your hat to bed and wake up the next day and wear it onto another movie. Jacques Tourneur, another great European director who came here and made some things. And he made Canyon Passage with Dana Andrews, Brian Donnelly, and Susan Hayward. And Tourneur, of course, also very much a dark kind of a noir director, and brings that sensibility to this 1946 film, which is it's sort of subversive in a way. It's got all the usual stuff, the prospecting and gunslingers and and prostitutes and all that stuff. All takes place in Oregon in the 1850s. And I'll tell you, the thing that really makes this is Lloyd Bridges. Lloyd Bridges plays.
Yeah, I was going to say, yes.
Lloyd just kills it, absolutely kills it. Hoagie Carmichael is in this of all people as well. But Lloyd Bridges he just kind of walks away with the film, plays a gunslinger, and he's just so good. Really good.
Ward Bond, Susan Hayward killing it. You know who you don't buy in this movie? Dana Andrews.
That's really true. It's absolutely true. It's straight up true. The last three here. I'm going to mention Superdome first. These last three are weird. Actually, I'm going to start with the double feature. So Sweeney, and then its follow-up Sweeney 2, is an incredibly overlooked 1978 and 1977-78 pair of films. And everybody's kind of forgotten that these exist. They were directed by different guys. David Wicks did the first one. Tom Clegg did the second one. And they're basically British cop films. They're kind of like in the vein of everything else that was being done in the 70s, Serpico, the Seven Ups, French Connection, except on the British end of things. They're not quite like the British crime films from the late 60s. They're not like, the Michael Caine stuff.
Not Get Carter.
No, it's not exactly Get Carter. This is almost leading into the British crime television of the 80s. And both of these films are actually quite good, very interesting, and worth checking out. If you've never seen them, you should see the Sweeney and the Sweeney 2 on Blu-ray from Kino. Now we get weird. Superdome. Tim, do you remember Superdome from 1978?
Oh, hell yeah.
What?
Absolutely remember
I so forgot this.
David Jansen.
Yeah.
David Jansen was still alive.
Yeah. David Jansen, directed by Jerry Jameson and starring David Jansen and an unbelievable cast. Van Johnson, Ken Howard, Edie Adams, Donna Mills, and Jane Wyatt. You know who also is in this? And I had completely forgotten. Tom freaking Selleck is in this.
Oh, he is. Tom Selleck is in this. He absolutely is. Young Clifton Davis. Remember Clifton Davis?
Yeah.
Is in this. But yes, Tom Selleck is in this just before Magnum P.I.
Yeah. It's just crazy. Susan Howard before Dallas. It's amazing. And this is kind of it's a Super Bowl thing, and it's everything takes place in New Orleans, and it's kind of like Towering Inferno in the Super Bowl without a fire. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's just a lot of drama, a lot of soap opera stuff. But man, what a weird movie that was. And here's the weirdest movie of all. I never even knew this movie existed. Have you ever heard of Prey for the Wildcats?
No. Yeah.
Dude, what a bizarre movie this is. 1974, totally off my radar. You're not going to believe this. And this has a really, really good commentary, by the way, with film historian Amanda Reyes and podcaster Bill Ackerman. They explain everything. Whatever weird questions you have, they are all answered in the commentary. I'm just going to tell you right now, this is about Andy Griffith is a guy, a rich businessman, who challenges 3 ad executives to a motorcycle road trip to Baja. And those executives this is Andy Griffith challenges 3 ad execs. And the ad execs are played by Robert Reed, Marjo Gortner, and William Shatner.
So, Papa Brady, Captain Kirk.
Marjo Gortner, the preacher, and Andy Taylor.
That is wild,
it's
man.
wild. And then, as if that's not bad enough, Angie Dickinson and Janet Margolin show up just to give it a little bit of female power. Weirdest movie ever. Utterly, unbelievably strange and bizarre. And it's a thriller. I mean, you would think it's a comedy from the people involved, but it's a thriller. There's actually kind of there's a trick to it. You know, it's like Andy's got something up his sleeve, and it's just a weird movie. Directed by Robert Michael Lewis, who I never heard of. Not sure. And Jack Turley wrote it. Don't know who these people are. But man, what a weird movie. Pray for the Wildcats. What an insanely strange movie. Anyway, there's our stack of regular Kino Studio classics for this month, and man, what a great bunch they are. A lot of fun stuff in there. Tim, I am going to let you now talk about Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, which we got on 4K, and all I'm going to say on my end is this is an unbelievably beautiful 4K. This just sets a whole new standard for 4K mastering. It is phenomenal to look at. As a movie, take it away.
Well, look, the movie, and I am going to get you to describe what sort of extras that comes with, because I'm sure it's going to be all kinds of stuff on that 4K. J.J. Abrams, sort of wrapping out this series with this extremely, extremely derivative film. That ultimately is extremely talky as it tries to talk its way through its narrative. It's as if they're trying to work it out as they're going along, right?
Yeah.
And you see these big chunks of film where Kylo Ren, our boy Adam Driver, and Daisy Ridley are talking, and you get the sense that, you know what? I think they're kind of writing this out as they go. It seems like they're sort of just working it out. Anyway, not a particularly satisfying wrap up to the series. Some of the action pieces are pretty fantastic. I must say, some of the set pieces are pretty fantastic, and action sequences are pretty fantastic. But it's just not a satisfying sort of wrap out to the series. Now, I've been saying for a long time that these movies have started to eat each other.
Yeah.
You know, and this one is just a sort of ultimate representation of that. It's engaged in a sort of fan service to the extent that that every few moments in the film, you're engaged in one of these that, sort of moments, because it's so heavily engaged in fan service. But anyway, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've been look, if I'm honest with myself, out of 9 movies, and 11 if we include the 2 non-canonical Star Wars things, I really only like 2 of them. And I don't even like Star Wars that much, but I really like Empire. And episode 3 is, it's got its moments, but episode 1 and 2 are garbage, and I hate Return of the Jedi, and I haven't really liked any of these last 3. I kind of feel it's all derivative fan service, like you said. So, I mean, look, as a technical exercise, there's some really, really good stuff in it. There's some good direction. There's some great effects, but on balance, I don't think it feels like these last 3 films, they didn't really plan them out very well. And there's no excuse for that. It just feels like they sort of switched it up in the second one, and then they didn't like where that was going, and then they kind of backtracked and retconned everything for the third one. It feels very haphazard. So I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I don't have a lot of hope for the Star Wars universe going forward. Got another interesting new film here, Standing Up, Falling Down, with Billy Crystal and Ben Schwartz. This is a really interesting little movie. Almost escaped my radar. I didn't realize that we had even gotten this, and things have been chaotic here. But this was at last year's Tribeca Film Festival, and completely was not on my radar as a theatrical release. And Billy Crystal has kind of not done movies a lot in the last decade or so, and he's kind of gone away. And you forget what a really, really good actor he is. Here he's kind of playing second fiddle to Ben Schwartz from Parks and Rec, who plays this. Well, let's see. They're effectively playing kind of a father-son duo, but they're not father and son. You're talking about a guy, Ben Schwartz, who is having certain life issues, let's just say. And Billy Crystal plays this guy named Marty, who is this dermatologist, and he has other life issues. And you bring together these two guys from different generations and different life experience, and there's some really interesting alchemical things that happen between the two characters. I'll just say it's really quite smart, and
it reminded me. And I think I'm going back to the maybe it was the early 90s or late 80s. Billy Crystal and Alan King, right?
A little bit, Mr. Saturday Night. Oh, not Mr. Saturday Night. You're talking about
close to that one, but the other one, Alan King he was his dad. Billy Crystal was the son.
Yeah,
Alan King was the dad.
That's right. Alan King played the king of the extras, right?
Yes. You remember that? This movie reminded me of that. That's like the late 80s. I got Memories of Me.
That's
Memories of Me.
Yes, that's good call.
This was so reminiscent of that to me, only with Billy playing the Alan King part.
Yes.
Which was so funny because Billy played a doctor in that movie, a young doctor. He comes out, his dad's this guy who's this the extra, the king of the extras. And they have this whole sort of relationship going. And I'm watching this little movie, Standing Up, Falling Down. I'm thinking to myself, why do I feel like I've seen this movie before?
Yeah.
I mean, because Billy made it 30 years ago, only he was playing the other guy.
That's great, I'd forgotten.
A beautiful little movie.
And, that movie was directed by Henry Winkler.
Exactly.
Memories of Me.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that now. This was directed by Matt Ratner, with whom I'm not familiar, but he's definitely solid. He's got a good firm hand on his actors, and it's a good solid little script by Peter Hoare. So
it was just great to see Billy, dude. Just love seeing Billy. He's so funny.
Totally.
In this little movie. I got this movie called A Transference.
Yeah.
That came out not too long ago. Sci-fi movie. Basically, kind of a supernatural sort of thing. Pretty good to my mind. But you'll have to see what you think. So this guy, he has this sister. She possesses these supernatural powers, and he's trying to do everything he can to stop her from getting grabbed by these secret agents hunting that want to put her into one of these classified government experimental programs. So it's a fairly ordinary sort of story, but I like the way it's all sort of laid out. And most of it sort of takes place in the countryside, like in rural areas, as opposed to big cities. And I thought that was sort of interesting too. Reminded me a little bit of that one that Michael Shannon made a few years ago, where he was paranoid.
Yeah.
That whole thing reminded me of it's a lot of paranoia in this one like that. I thought it was kind of cool too. Dug it. Science fiction film.
Terrific. That's from Epic. We also have a horror film, kind of a cult horror film called Verotica. That is a combination of erotica and Veronica, if you're not catching the drift there. This was at a number of kind of these cult film festivals. There are a lot of those around the world, and this one is definitely in. It's really low budget. It's really low budget. And they got a lot of kind of punk metal music on it, and it's basically kind of like Tales from the Crypt made for about 30 cents. If that's what it is. It's an anthology. It's 3 different stories, and they're all taken apparently from a comic book, a Danzig comic book called Verotic, which I've never heard of. I'm not familiar with. I guess Danzig is a comic book company or something or whatever it is. Anyway. Glenn Danzig, who I assume is the guy behind the comic book, wrote and directed it, and it's silly and it's gory and it's occultish and it's ultimately really very very funny, and it's made for $1.50, and these movies wouldn't be worth watching if they weren't made for $1.50. Documentary here I want us to talk about for a second, Mystify, Michael Hutchence, which was in theaters about a month ago, and it was I think it was a one night only thing through Fathom Events. And now it's out on Blu-ray, so everybody can see it, and you don't have to worry about it one night only. This is a tremendous documentary. I am admittedly a big fan of In Excess and Michael Hutchence, and his suicide was so tragic and just hit me like a ton of bricks at the time. This is directed and written by Richard Lowenstein, who has been with In Excess for decades. He was there at the beginning, directed a lot of their best music videos, has done documentaries and tour videos about them. Lowenstein is a very, very accomplished filmmaker and documentarian and music video director. And this basically is an examine. It's not just a straight bio of Michael Hutchence. It sort of looks. It's got all the archival footage you could possibly want. And he goes back and he interviews everybody about what went wrong, what happened. Kylie Minogue, who was Hutchence's girlfriend when they were young pop stars together. He revisits everyone, and it has a reveal in it, which is really heartbreaking. Which is that there was an incident in Denmark back in like the early 90s, I want to say, where there was an altercation with a taxi driver who punched Michael Hutchence in the face and knocked him backwards, and he fell and he hit his head on the curb and it knocked him out. And nothing was thought of it until years later when it was revealed that he had traumatic brain injury that utterly and completely changed his personality. It damaged his sense of smell. And it changed him, and his band members and everyone who knew him, they are convinced that was the beginning of the end that led him to suicide. So we're not talking about somebody who suffered from chronic depression, drug abuse, or any of this stuff. There is drug abuse involved, but it's a self-medication. It's all in response to the absolute tragedy of traumatic brain injury and that one incident. It's a really good documentary.
Not the classic sort of story of the 27th, for one thing, he was 37 years old when he died, but not the sort of classic that at all, a completely sort of different dynamic. Yeah.
And the it gets even more tragic because the part of the story right at the end where he basically breaks up the marriage of what's his name, the British, why am I drawing a blank now? We Are the World, Farm Aid.
Geldorf.
Thank you. He busts up Bob Geldof's marriage and absconds with Geldof's wife, and that created this horrible custody battle. And that was, that really partly is what precipitated it too. And there was drug abuse there, and it's such a tragic story. It just really, really is. But what a great documentary! I highly recommend it. Mystify Michael Hutchence, definitely worth checking out. What should we jump into now?
You want to get into some of that TV business?
Yeah, let's do TV.
I'll join you on some of that. Ultraman Orb is at the top of that list, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Excuse me. Which is
Ultraman Orb the movie and Ultraman Geed the movie, both of them.
Big anime, correct?
Yeah, basically, they're live action, but they're Blu-ray live action, and this is from Mill Creek, and I didn't know that they had taken these two series and kind of made TV movies out of them, but it looks cool. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but you're a big Ultraman fan of the newer stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All this, particularly most of the animated stuff is absolutely fantastic. Anything interesting in terms of the special features on those discs?
Absolutely, flat out nothing. There's nothing here. They've got, you can redeem them for the Spree, the library. They've got the Mill Creek has their own streaming service, their own kind of version of Movies Anywhere or Vudu, which is Spree. Moviespree.com. So you can certainly add those to your library there if you want.
Anyway, yeah, I'm a big fan of this series going back to the 60s. It's when I used to love all my Ultraman business there. The Norwegian television series Twins.
Oh, it's good.
What you can tell me about that one, brother?
Yeah, hold on. I'm dropping stuff all over the place here. Twin is really, really good. This is from MHZ Networks. You can do MHZ Choice as a streaming network if you want to watch a lot of this really, really cool stuff. This is basically a 6-hour series on 3 DVDs. A really, really cool crime drama from Norway that stars Christopher Hivju, who was known for playing Tormund Giantsbane in Game of Thrones.
Oh.
Okay? They all have beards. I don't know who's who on Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? They're all kind of the same. But this is really, really cool. All of these Scandinavian crime dramas, whether they're Danish, whether they're Swedish, whether they're Norwegian, they all kind of do something a little bit similar. And they're all looking to use the environment of Scandinavia as an additional character. And the same thing happens here. And the concept here is that you've got two twin brothers who are very, very, whose lives have gone in completely different directions. And they come together. I'm going to try to figure out how to not give anything away because a lot of this spans several episodes, but it's been many, many years since they've seen each other. And when they finally see each other again, something happens. And that is the inception of the rest of this series, which takes place in this area called the Lofton Islands, or the Lofoten Islands, I think is maybe how you do it. And those islands are just a fascinating place, like really fascinating. For example, I didn't know you could go surfing in Norway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? Who knew? You just think of surfing as a thing that you do close here. We don't once you go north, once you're anywhere further north than say northern France or Normandy, people don't surf anymore. It's too cold, right? No, they're surfing in Norway. And it's a really interesting narrative. It's a very, very smart, slow burn, but I recommend it. Tim, what do you think of Lethal Weapon? We're in our third season now of Lethal Weapon. It's on Blu-ray.
Yeah. Third season of Lethal Weapon. David Wayans. First of all, if you had told me that was going to last 3 seasons, but I've always been these movies adapted to the television series of our youth. I've had issues with these ever since they started. Nevertheless, there it is. They did manage to pull off changing characters, actors midway through. Or I guess a season through that show, but Damon Wayans as Roger Murtaugh. I don't know, man. When I think back to the original Lethal Weapon series, with our guy Danny Glover and of course Mel Gibson's, Damon Wayans is not who comes to my mind. It's like they scaled everything down 15 years from the television series from where it was in that whatever that movie was, 1984 or whatever it is. But here we are in the third complete season. Anything decent on that Blu-ray?
Not really. I mean, Sean William Scott joins the team this time, but it's more of a. I mean, they changed Murtaugh's family, and it's like nothing. It's just nothing. The title is the only thing that it's got in common. Yeah, it's the title, and it's a black and a white guy, and there's nothing else about it that has anything to do with it. So
and I never did figure out why the original guy, his name was Clayne Crawford, who played Mark Riggs, Mel Gibson. In the first series, the first 3, I guess it would be the first 2 seasons, and Sean comes into this season, and I don't know, it's just a weird thing to do, but they seem to have pulled it off.
Well, it's weird because Sean William Scott plays a former CIA guy who becomes an LAPD cop. How often does that happen? Never.
What? Hell would you do that?
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all.
Hey, man, what's happening with the original Series V released on Blu-ray? I love that series. I think from about 1983.
Yeah.
Was huge. The reboot of the remake was all high-tech and kind of glossy, but I still prefer this one.
Yeah. I like this one because it's cheesy.
Yeah.
If you're going to tell this dumb story, you want it to be as cheesy as possible. And, boy, it sure is cheesy. Kenneth Johnson, who did, just tons of sci-fi back in the 80s and the 90s, but mostly in the 80s. This is 1983. Yeah, and the 70s, frankly. Kenneth Johnson, I think, directed a lot of $6 Million Mans and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So he wrote and directed this, and it's definitely got that vibe to it. It's a huge, huge cast. Mark Singer basically is the hero of this. He was Mark Singer was a bit of a thing from the Beastmaster on into this during that early part of the 80s. And you know what? If you're gonna have lizard, it's gotta be. They're lizard people, for crying out loud, man. A woman gives birth to a lizard baby. You gotta be cheesy. Don't make it too serious. They have a commentary by Kenneth Johnson, which is really fun because he quite clearly understands that this is not meant to be taken that seriously. And then there's a behind-the-scenes documentary, and it's the original V. What do you want? It's on Blu-ray.
What I loved about that series is every single episode of that series, one of the lizard, they learned how to disguise themselves as humans.
Yeah.
But in every single episode, one of their human suits would be torn. And you could see that it was one of the lizard people behind that thing there. The Kominsky Method. Was the first full season on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Love this series. Absolutely. Michael Douglas, Alan Arkin, in the Chuck Lorre created and directed series. These two old guys doing some of the best work of their careers. Funny that you and I have experienced most of, if not all of, certainly Michael Douglas Michael Douglas's career.
Yeah.
I mean, my first Michael Douglas is Streets of San Francisco in the early 70s. When I'm a kid watching Michael Douglas on television, and a good chunk of Alan Arkin's career. And here they are, still doing what they do and kind of making fun of themselves as they do it. I love this series.
See, that's what's great about the show. It took me a little bit to get into it. A good friend of ours from the box office days, Ben Rosenstein, is the one that recommended this to me, and got me watching it on excuse me, on Netflix. And it's what I like about this is, yes, they're making fun of themselves and they're making fun of their careers, and they're also kind of waxing poetic about it at the same time. But because Chuck Lorre is working in the streaming space now, where he doesn't have to crank out 22 half hours of, Roseanne or, 2.5 Men or whatever it is, and he's not working within a network constraint, he's 8 episodes. You only got to do 8 episodes. So
Yeah.
he seems to be much more comfortable. It's like he can craft the characters better. It's not all about a punchline every 8 seconds, right? There's actually some feeling to this. It's a very unusual turn for Chuck Lorre. I got to admit, I respect him more as a writer after this than after all the different shows he's done over the last 20 years. Big Bang Theory and all the rest of this. Those are all funny, and they all have a lot of shtick and a lot of good one-liners, but they're not deep. This is really rich.
Yeah, an absolutely lovely series with these guys. Just like I said, really doing some of the best work of their career. Blindspot, is this the complete 4th season
That is
that we have here?
Yeah.
Of Blindspot. Watch season 1 and 2 kind of fell off around season 3. So I'm not really sure where this picks up. But I rather enjoyed this series and thought it was pretty slick at the time. Anything interesting on that Blu-ray?
Not especially. It's it is interesting that it comes around now. You're looking at everything through the prism of the coronavirus at the moment, and there's there's some stuff going on here, where there's a disease, they have to get to, there's a drug that has wiped someone's memory, and they've got to sort of find a cure, and they've got to search around the globe, and it has a certain coronavirus vibe to it. But it still stretches credibility a little bit. I think shows that sort of get into the global espionage thing without the budget to sort of make it feel global are shortchanging themselves a little bit. It doesn't feel quite as A-list as it probably should, but it's fine. It's adequate. It has a following.
Not bad. The 100, a series that I watched most of. This is the complete
6th season.
Original 6th season.
Yeah,
oh,
6th season.
Is the 6th season.
Yeah.
Of the 100. Isaiah, one of our friends, Isaiah Washington, on the show. Anything interesting there?
Not especially. They have the complete series out as well. They did not send us the complete series. They sent us just the 6th season. But I like the cast. I really do. I mean, for one of these post-apocalyptic shows. And there were a bunch that all came out around about the same time. I think this is the one that really did it the best. It put a really good cast together. And every time I cough, I think, is it a dry cough? It's a thing. I have to tell this joke right now because a friend of ours is out. I won't get into what he's doing, but one of our friends is out working on the front lines of this thing, right. and he heard a trucker the other day say, and this is the greatest line ever. He said, I used to cough to cover my farts, and now I fart to cover my coughs. I thought that's so. Leave it to a trucker to come up with a line like that. You and I could sit around in front of a keyboard just trying to think of a funny line, and some guy driving a Peterbilt out near Rosemead comes up with that without even blinking. There's so much talent out there. Anyway, no, but the 100, the 6th season, solid, real solid, and it does all the things that these post-apocalyptic movies and TV shows usually do, but it does it with a smarter chemistry. I kind of wish Lost had a cast like this,
and a hell of a lot of production value too. The first couple of seasons of that, you have these sort of two dynamics. You have this this platform, this sort of ship where humanity is hovering over the Earth, and the ideas that Earth is uninhabitable.
Yeah,
and it's a pretty sort of brutal existence. And then over the course of a few seasons, we work our way into into some interesting things that include a rift between various different sects of people. And they build the stories out fairly intensely. I rather enjoyed that series, The 100.
Indeed.
The first, what do we have here? The first complete season of Legacies?
Yes, the complete first season of Legacies, not on Blu-ray, only on DVD. And this is, I don't know, have you watched any of this show?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
It's
vampires.
yeah. It's all kind of in that same vein with the Vampire Diaries and the originals. And I don't know. I don't know why we have to. They always put them in a school. This is all they all kind of have this school of. It's a Harry Potter thing, right? It's the Salvatore school for the young and gifted. Okay, but why do we always got to be in school? Like, I don't get it. I don't know. It's
always with the magicians and the witches and the vampires is always there.
The werewolves, So anyway, it's basically the Harry Potter version of all that stuff. I watched a couple of episodes. I guess I'll probably try to give it a chance and see where else it goes. Scooby-Doo, Return to Zombie Island. This is a really utterly silly original Scooby-Doo movie. It's on DVD. You know what? I mean, it's not terrible, but at 80 minutes long, it really overstays its welcome, I think.
Yeah.
There's just too many of these, and they all do the same thing. But you know what? There's a whole generation now that they don't know the original Scooby-Doo, and I guess if this works for them, then fine, so be it.
Yeah. Genlock complete first season. Is that what we got on Blu-ray?
Yeah, it's basically anime-inspired Hollywood mecha stuff. Takes place 5 decades into the future, and there's kind of a fascistic change in the world, and it's not quite post-apocalyptic, but it's definitely like futuristic near apocalypse. Anyway, a lot of really good voice casting here, though. Michael B. Jordan, Dakota Fanning, Aja Kate Dillon, David Tennant. Really interesting voices, and they all do it. That's what really kind of holds it together. It's not the robot suits and the battles. It's that they got real actors to do the voices. It's very, very good.
I'm looking at Unexplained season 1. The only interesting thing about the Unexplained series, there are a number of them, right?
Yeah.
You sit down, you watch one of these Unexplained, and in fact, all of that stuff is perfectly explainable. Every single time. You watch one of these things, I'm like, no. I know the explanation for that.
Yeah.
But whatever, it's a whole series.
But you know why you watch this? You don't watch this for the unexplained or the explainable.
No.
You watch it because it's got William Shatner on it.
Hell yeah.
It might as well be called, William Shatner's Garden. I don't care. William Shatner, goes to the copy store and makes copies. I don't care. I just want to watch William Shatner do some stuff. That's it.
I just know if Leonard Nimoy was still alive, he'd have some series called Explain. He would just undo every single episode of that. But SpongeBob, season 11.
Yeah, SpongeBob. Did we need a season 11 of SpongeBob? Really?
I don't know.
Do we really need this? I mean, truly, my daughter is not into this at all. Probably never will be. And I'm watching some of these and I'm thinking, but this looks like the same stuff they've been doing for the past 10 years. Do we need 11?
SpongeBob at this point is directed at like 28-year-olds.
Probably a good point.
That's not for you.
Yeah.
Kids.
Well.
No.
Well, anyway, there's a special feature on here, Plankton's Color Nullifier, which tells you that even the people putting these DVDs and Blu-rays out are bored. They don't even want to bother with any decent extras anymore. The last TV stuff we got here, 3 volumes, and the third one just came out. The other 2 have come out previously, but I want to talk about all 3 of them. 3 volumes of Popeye the Sailor, the 1940s, volume 1, 2, and 3. Absolutely tremendous. Excuse me. There are 46 theatrical shorts between these. There are 14 shorts on volume 1, 17 on volume 3, and 15 on volume 2. But pretty much all the best Popeyes are these. The 1940s Popeyes are absolutely superb. They establish the characters, the conflicts, everything that any subsequent Popeye incarnation would go into. These did it the best, and they have been all completely remastered from the original negatives, the original Technicolor and Cinecolor negatives. There were 2 different color processes that were used. And it's just they're just so smart. They're so absolutely incredibly smart, and you just can't go wrong. Olive Oil and Popeye and Bluto and Wimpy. I mean, it's a great bunch, and I'm particularly fond of the world of Popeye because Richard Libertini was a very good friend of mine. Grew up with his son, and he played Giesel in the live action Robert Altman Popeye with Robin Williams, which they shot on Malta. And I remember very well when they were shooting that. And, that's an underrated film, too. I think that Altman did some of his best work in that thing, and no one gave him credit for it. But it's really wonderful to see these old Popeye cartoons again, and they're so colorful. I don't think they even looked this good at the time they were originally released, to be honest.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great stuff. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? By the way, we are going to wrap the show out today with an interview. We're going to do this a few more minutes, and then we have an interview with our very good friend Stephen Farber, former president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association and a very dear friend of ours, current member of the LA Film Critics Association. He just wrote a new book with his friend Michael McClellan called Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies. And Tim and I had a chance to talk to him this morning and talk about this book. And it's a great book. It's just a really great book. And we'll get more into that later when we run that interview. But let's see. Where else should we go now?
Are we going to bump up with some of those classic titles?
Yeah, let's do some of those. Let's do some of the classic stuff. I want to give a shout out to Munster Go Home, which I just absolutely adore. There were a few feature length Munster movies. I think 2 complete after the series wrapped, and Munster Go Home, full color, not black and white, full color. So you see all of the creepy color and the green skin and all that stuff. Man, this is just so unbelievably hilarious. Munster Go Home is now on Blu-ray from Shout Factory, Scream Factory line, and basically Herman inherits a fortune in England, and then you have the British family that wants to basically kill them and get them out of the way so that they can take the inheritance back. And it is the best thing about this. As much as I love the Munsters, the best thing about this is Terry Thomas. Thomas is always talking about bashing him on the cranium with something jagged. It is so damn funny. This movie is so funny. I really love this. And there's a commentary on this. Believe it or not, Tim, you're going to die. This is the greatest commentary ever. I don't know whose idea this was, but it was genius. They went and they dug up Butch Patrick, who plays Eddie Munster.
Yes. And
said, who can Eddie Munster do the commentary with? I know, Rob Zombie. They got Butch Patrick and Rob Zombie do the commentary together, and it's great. It's so good.
That is just hysterical.
It's so good. All kinds of stories I'd never even heard of before. Butch Patrick. I mean, there's a lot of real great sarcasm in there too. But anyway, it's terrific. And then there is also a bonus feature film on here, The Munsters' Revenge, which they don't tout enough. And they should, because that's actually really fun as well. So that was made for television. But Munster Go Home from 1966, really great, and a great audio commentary. Got to check it out. It's a lot of fun.
Am I insane, or is it the 25th anniversary of Tommy Boy?
Yes, it is. Isn't that wild?
This makes me dizzy. My goddaughter's only 28 years old. This is the 25th anniversary. Wonderful. Chris Farley and David Spade, of course. SNL alum. Making this really sort of almost surprisingly goofy, dumb, and sweet movie that was a big hit. That launched them on what did they do 2 or 3 more movies together, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. I mean, they did several. Tommy Boy is the one that everybody remembers, and I can't believe it's been that long. Chris Farley, it feels like he died yesterday, but this is a new Steelbook, an anniversary Steelbook for Tommy Boy, and I don't think people gave these movies enough credit at the time. I'll be honest. It's so funny. Chris Farley is so funny in these things. Peter Siegel directed this, and we forget Rob Lowe's in this.
Yeah.
And Bo Derek is in this. And Brian Dennehy plays, of course, Chris Farley's dad. That's great casting. But yeah, this is a really fun film. It's just too bad. Well, anyway, yes, 25 years since Tommy Boy. Boy, man, holy shnikes. That's all I can say.
I imagine it's got to be all kinds of fantastic stuff on
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a ton of extras on here. There's commentary by Peter Siegel, a bunch of featurettes, storyboard comparisons, deleted and extended scenes, alternate takes. And oddly enough, even a gag reel, which is surprisingly funny because you would think all the funny stuff wound up in the movie. But there's a lot of great stuff in the gag reel, too. Chris Farley is just funny all the time. And do you ever watch David Spade's talk show at night?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Love that show. It's so interesting, the stories he tells.
See, that's the thing. It seems like almost at least once or twice a week, he has a Chris Farley story. And it's always, he's just, and it's always new. Just the crazy things that Chris Farley did when they were shooting SNL. Like Farley would run into his office and slam the door and hide, because he just did something to somebody. Farley was always up to something. Really a larger than life personality. Did you ever meet Chris Farley?
Oh, yeah, once or twice. Let's see. What was the one where he played the ninja? Beverly Hills
Ninja? Yeah.
Did the junket for that and talked with Chris. He was very, very sweet guy. Yeah, man. Actually, I think it was not long after that we lost Chris.
Yeah.
That movie. It was Beverly Hills Ninja or something like that. Something like that.
I saw him once at a hotel. I saw him in the lobby of the Shutters Hotel in Santa Monica once, just kind of cruising through the lobby.
Right down on the beach.
Yeah, and he was just wearing a t-shirt and Bermuda shorts in the dead of winter, and I guess that's who he was.
These 3D rarities, I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
which is just a series of these very, very early archive of these very, very early sort of 3D films. I think a lot of them from Kino, if I'm not mistaken, from the early 50s all the way through like the middle 60s of these 3D films. It's interesting how these technologies, how old some of these technologies that we think of as new or modern technologies. And we do 3D films in different ways now than they did back then. Back then, it really just involved a whole bunch of cameras.
Yep.
Now we do digital things and whatnot. But these rarities are absolutely fascinating.
They're really good. These are very, very rare 3D films. This is the second volume of these that have come from the 3D Film Archive, and they have audio commentaries on that sort of help you get the feel of why and how these things work. I mean, you look at the 3D today, and it's probably nothing spectacular compared to the our recent 3D burst, but there's some really interesting stuff here, like notably El Corazón y la Espada. I'm sure my Spanish is going to just devastate somebody, but that is a feature-length 3D film, the translation of which is The Heart and the Sword, or The Sword of Granada, and this was the first 3D movie ever made in Mexico. And they've done a 4K restoration of it and restored it to its original aspect ratio, and I mean really meticulously. And it's very interesting because it's not at all what 3D was here at the time. It's very, very different. But it's got Cesar Romero in it. And that's got to be worth something too. There's also The Black Swan, which has a commentary by Mike Ballou that also gives you it's very, very sharp. It's very sharp. And then there's also some stereoscopic photographs from the library of Harold Lloyd. So really, it's fascinating. There's I don't like 3D, but if you have a 3D HD TV, which you need. And they don't make many of those anymore. And you've got a Blu-ray 3D, a 3D Blu-ray player, or one of those PlayStations that will do it. You'll be able to watch these and really get to experience film history in a fascinating new way. So I don't often recommend 3D stuff, but I think we recommend that one. That's definitely cool.
And for a sort of historical context.
Yeah.
Their Finest Hour, that a series of 5 classic British World War II films, including a Graham Greene adaptation. This is an amazing set.
It is. This is a great set. The most impressive of all of these is probably Dunkirk, not the most recent Christopher Nolan film, but the original 1958 Leslie Norman directed film that tells basically the exact same story, except it does it in a more epic way, believe it or not. John Mills and Richard Attenborough, very young at the time in 1958, star. And the movie was made only 18 years. 1958 is only 18 years after the actual event itself. So, there are a lot of the people acting in this remember when it happened. They were alive when it happened. Made by Ealing Studios, best known for comedies, but not this time. Michael Anderson, who would go on to do things like the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, directed The Dam Busters in 1955, which is specifically about the RAF squadron that was assigned to blow up German dams. And allegedly, I didn't know this, but allegedly this is what inspired the end of Star Wars when they blow up the Death Star.
Ah.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Had no idea. Also from 1958, the same year as Dunkirk, is Ice Cold and Alex, which was directed by Tim J. Lee Thompson.
Yeah, J. Lee at work.
John Mills again. And this is all about a treacherous road trip, a medical unit that has to go across the North Africa to safety. It's anything in North Africa I like, because that's the undertold story of World War II. The Colditz Story from 1955 as well, directed by Guy Hamilton, again, great James Bond director. And this is all about a group of Allied prisoners of war trying to make a break for it from the prisoner of war camp or prison at Colditz Castle. Once again, starring John Mills, everybody's favorite World War II guy. And then the earliest of these, made actually during the war, is Went the Day Well, which is directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, based on the Graham Greene story. Another Ealing Studios production, which is basically about an English village trying to figure out where the German spies are. Pretty great stuff. So all five of these are really good films on Blu-ray from Film Movement Classics. It's great stuff.
Fantastic stuff, man. I got to tell you. Hudson River Massacre, which was actually released, I guess in the United States, as Canadian Wilderness in 1965.
Yeah.
These fur hunters out in the wilderness. There's a kidnapping and a ruthless landowner. It's very something akin to, I don't know, some of the John Wayne films in the middle 40s here. So anyway, it's a pretty neat film. Anything on that DVD, Wade? Well, I guess we're calling it Hudson River Massacre, but like I said, it was called Canadian Wilderness.
Yeah, no extras, but it is certainly a film that I didn't even know existed. I'll tell you that. It's an Italian film set in the Canadian wilderness. It's just Italian. It's just so strange. It's just it's like a weird artifact that came across our radar. I'm like, really? No extras. No extras. We've also got the Bolshevik Trilogy, which are the three most famous films made by the legendary silent era Russian director, Soviet director. I'm not even going to do his first name. Pudovkin. We all know him as Pudovkin. His first name is unpronounceable. But the three films are Mother, The End of St. Petersburg, and Storm Over Asia. Mother is considered one of the all-time greats of the era. It's just from 1926, really considered one of the great silent films. Not just great Russian silence, but just one of the legendary silent films of all time, based on the Maxim Gorky novel. It's an essential. You got to have it. Just get this set essentially for that one movie. Storm Over Asia was made 2 years later. This is a new 2K remaster from Lobster Films, taken from the original Preservation Elements, with a score by Timothy Bach and the Olympia Chamber Orchestra. And then between those two is the least interesting of the three films, The End of St. Petersburg from 1927. Which is basically just kind of a 10th anniversary propaganda film. Pudovkin, like Eisenstein and all the other directors working in the Soviet Union at the time, was not above or exempt from having to make propaganda films. It's not that interesting, but it is a trilogy, and it's all of his career. And this is from Flicker Alley on Blu-ray. Definitely check it out.
Good. Where are we going?
Let's wrap out with the two criterions we've got here. Got two criterions this week. One that I would not have expected. The other I totally expected. The Prince of Tides is the one that I would not have expected. Not because it's not a good film. It's not a perfect film, but it's of the films that Barbra Streisand has directed, I would have expected them to go for Yentl first. Nonetheless. The Prince of Tides is a solid film. My very good and dear friend Melinda Dillon is in it, and I remember when they were making it. And it's got some really, really good stuff in it. It's a little bit schmaltzy for my taste. It's a little bit overly melodramatic, but Barbra Streisand is an underrated director. This is from 1991. And her scenes with Nick Nolte are some really rock solid. They're really, really good. It's essentially a relationship movie between a troubled man, played by Nick Nolte, and a therapist, a psychiatrist, played by Barbra Streisand. And it all centers around his sister's suicide attempt, and that's sort of what brings them together. But based on a very acclaimed novel, and it's got gobs and gobs of extras on it, and including an audio commentary from Barbra Streisand, which was recorded in 1991 and then recently updated, plus tons of featurettes and interviews and costume and makeup tests, and your appreciation for the film will increase thereafter.
George Carlin in a rare dramatic sort of turn.
Yes, true. Very true, yeah.
In that film. And Showboat, the 1936 one, right?
Directed by James Whale, the Frankenstein director who directed Showboat, of all things.
And, of course, this Showboat is the Showboat with Paul Robeson.
That's right.
And that's supposed to be one a few years later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fantastic, a fantastic version. Irene Dunn, of course. In the film. So yeah, the Hattie McDaniel, so some faces and names in this film familiar, that would be very, very familiar a little bit. This is, of course, before Gone with the Wind. So Hattie McDaniel before she would win that Oscar a couple of years later.
That's right. From 1936. And this includes a lot of very impressive stuff on it, including the Academy Award-winning short documentary made by Saul Turrell, recently completely restored, Paul Robeson Tribute to an Artist. That was made in 1979. It's a great, great short. It really, really lays out why Robeson matters and what transpired in his career thereafter. Tons of extras on here. There's a new interview with James Curtis, who was James Whale's biography. A new interview show with Shauna Redmond, Professor Shauna Redmond, called Recognizing Race in Showboat, which contextualizes all of the racial politics of the film in hindsight in a way that you would never have imagined. So it gives it a completely new perspective. And then there are 4 performances from the sound prologue of the 1929 version of Showboat, which includes songs from the original Broadway cast members and another 20 minutes of silent excerpts from that film, and then an audio commentary by a film historian. So it's really, really great. It's really, really great. Showboat, Edna Ferber's Showboat, directed by James Whale. Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Kern did the music and lyrics, and it, of course, has the amazing Paul Robeson just nailing it as he's never nailed it before. All right, with that, we are going to now go into our interview with Stephen Farber. Stephen Farber, one of the most esteemed film critics in Los Angeles, and has done film series and written for everybody. A former president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association and a very, very good friend and colleague of ours. We are proud to know him. And Stephen and Michael McClellan have written a new book called Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies. And Tim and I had a great chat with Stephen this morning as to why and how they came up with their thesis that 1962, not 1939, not 1999, not any of these other years that keep being bandied about, but why 1962 is, in fact, that single greatest and most important year for the movies. It was a good chat, wasn't it, Tim?
Absolutely fantastic. So insightful, and people will see why.
All right. Without further ado, here we're wrapping out the show with our interview with Stephen Farber.
Tim and I are elated to be talking to our good friend and LAFCA colleague, Stephen Farber, about his new book, Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies, which he wrote with Michael McClellan, with a wonderful foreword by Bill Condon. And it makes the case, we've all often heard the argument that 1939 was the greatest year in movie history, and Stephen and Michael are taking issue with that and making the argument with this incredible book that 1962 is the real greatest year at the movies. And what an amazing book it is. Stephen, thank you for talking to us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for those complimentary words.
It's such a good book. I'm not even all the way through it, but I've been like cherry picking the chapters that look most interesting to me. Tim, you had a question you wanted to launch into.
Well, it's so funny, Stephen. Wade and I were chit-chatting before. We were wondering which one of us would play devil's advocate, and neither one of us want to because we both completely agree with you. And we're like, this is going to be a boring interview. We're just like, yeah, Stephen, you're right. Yep, you're right about that too. So it's just the fact: have you really run into anyone pushing back hard against your thesis here? Because it's just an absolutely attractive and positive thesis.
Well, I mean, obviously there are people who have different favorite years, and Bill Condon mentioned that in his foreword, that often this kind of your favorite year is sort of the year that you came of age, maybe in adolescence. And he mentioned like 1971 for a while was his favorite year, but in looking at it more objectively, he had to agree that it really wasn't up to 1962. There have been many other years that have been thrown out. Some people say 1974, the year of Chinatown, Godfather Part 2 was their favorite year, and there was even a book written about 1999, a very recent year, probably a younger person who discovered movies at that particular time. But I don't think so. I mean, there are people who say, oh, well, yes, 62 was great, but I think such and such a year was as good or better. But we haven't really had pushback in terms of people saying, oh, this makes no sense at all, because I think when you just lay out the movies that came out that year and all the different things that were going on in society as well as in Hollywood, it's hard to argue with the basic thesis that this was an impressive year.
I am a worshiper of Lawrence of Arabia, so 1962 is always an elite year for me just based on that alone. But you raise so many interesting points. You cast your net very widely, like you were just saying. It's not just about the movies; it's about what's going on in Hollywood, in the society. And as we get into the 60s, all the original Hollywood moguls are basically retired or dead, except for Jack Warner. So widescreen is just coming in, and television is just becoming a thing, and obviously the cultural change of the 60s and the election of John F. Kennedy. I mean, all this stuff plays a part. Talk just for a moment about the environment of 1962 and how your thesis factors that into the movies.
Yes, I think that some people think that, there was all this change was going on in the late 60s when there were student riots, anti-war protests. Of course, that was the case. But in the early 60s, it was also a time of tremendous and important social change. Kennedy's election represented a whole new voice in American politics, a much younger kind of politician after the Eisenhower years, 8 years of Eisenhower. So this was a brand new figure, and the people that he brought in to his administration, often intellectuals, not the kinds of career politicians that you had seen before. And it was, of course, the period of a lot of civil rights protests that had started in the later 50s and was really going very strong in 62. All kinds of sit-ins, demonstrations. Martin Luther King Jr. was really in the news constantly. There was lots of movements towards desegregation at colleges, universities. 62 was actually the first year that a couple of movie theaters in the South, like Nashville and Atlanta, were desegregated. Hard to believe in a way that it was so late as 62, but change was in the air in a lot of ways, and this young, idealistic administration, much more activity about civil rights, a racial prejudice, very much being addressed at that time. So I think it was a time of change in society. There were one interesting thing we found out. I mean, there were a lot of very important seminal books that were published in '62. Silent Spring, which was a book that first kind of launched the environmental movement, was published in 1962. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, published in 1962. Ultimate anti-establishment book. It took a number of more years for the movie version to be made, but a lot of these new ideas were in the air in the early 60s, and I think some people have overlooked that, and because they focus on the late 60s when things were maybe more visible and more violent. But the early 60s was a part of a time of great cultural, social ferment.
Name some of the films that you think people really should focus on. I mean, the ones that jump out, in to me at least, are obviously Lawrence of Arabia and The Manchurian Candidate and Lolita and To Kill a Mockingbird, of course. You know, I mean, that was such a huge moment when Gregory Peck won the Oscar for that. What else is there out there that people might not realize is part of 1962?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's say on just the American scene, you've mentioned four of the very top movies there, but there was also A Miracle Worker, which won Academy Awards for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress, Days of Wine and Roses, a powerful study of alcoholism, Jack Lemmon, Lee Remick, both Oscar-nominated for their performances. There were John Ford's kind of classic Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Another new voice, though, Sam Peckinpah, made his first sort of breakthrough, more iconoclastic Western, Ride the High Country, that year. So those are some of the American movies. But one of the points of our book, why '62 was such an important year, was that it really represented this explosion of international cinema. And so many of the great foreign filmmakers had major movies in 1962. Fellini, who was a part of Boccaccio 70, with also Visconti and Vittorio De Sica, Ingmar Bergman, Through a Glass Darkly, Antonioni had two movies, La Notte and Eclipse, A Divorce Italian Style, which won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay of that year. Last year at Marienbad, Alain Resnais, a much talked about, debated movie. Francois Truffaut, perhaps the greatest of these people that year, had actually two movies come out in '62, Jules and Jim, of course, which may be his masterpiece, and Shoot the Piano Player, which had come out a little earlier in France, but was distributed in the U.S. in '62. So there was a lot of activity all over the world, and I think these international films had a great influence on Hollywood filmmakers as well over the next several years. Having seen these movies, then the newer American directors wanted to match them in terms of sexual candor, in terms of technical, stylistic experimentation, which you saw in movies like Last Year at Marienbad or Jules and Jim.
Fascinating. Where do you think this idea came from, Stephen, in the first place, that the 1962, the early 60s in general, was sort of a wasteland of American cinema? Where did that come from?
Well, I think the reason that some people might have thought that was that, and I think you just mentioned this, that the great studio era was coming to a close. A lot of the people that we associate with the golden age of Hollywood in terms of the top studio executives, like Louis B. Mayer, Harry Cohn, they had died. So there was a really changing of the guard then. but the sort of the glamorous dream factories had lost some of their luster in the early 60s. Television was stealing away audiences. These big studios could no longer count on the guaranteed audiences that they had in the 1940s up until the early 1950s. So it was a changing time and an opportunity for independent filmmakers and financiers to come into the scene. Lolita, for example, Stanley Kubrick's movie, a brilliant distillation of the Nabokov novel, was financed independently because no studio wanted to touch it. It was ultimately distributed by MGM after the film had been made by a new independent company, Seven Arts, and some English co-financing. It was actually filmed in England because of that. So it was definitely a new type of filmmaking going on. David and Lisa, another movie from 1962.
Frank Perry.
A very low-budget film Frank Perry directed. Yes, Eleanor Perry, his wife at the time, did the screenplay. Both were Oscar-nominated, by the way, that year. That was a movie that was made for like $135,000, completely independently financed by private people just putting in a couple $1,000s here. And yet it managed to score a big box office success. It really played in a lot of theaters around the country for many months. Got very good reviews in the press, some great reviews, and I say these two top Oscar nominations, Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay. It was adapted from a short novel by a psychiatrist. So it was really a lot of new things going on at the time, and it was a new mode of filmmaking. It was just starting to get going. I mean, the major studios were, of course, still operating, but they had new management often, and they were trying new things because some of the old formulas had gotten tired. So it was definitely a time of change and innovation.
I
as you point out in the book, I'm sorry, Wade, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
Yet, as you point out in the book, Stephen, some of the old school was still hanging on. John Ford, on both the list in 1939, among the best directors in 1939, yet still doing some of his best work literally in 1962.
Yes, and Hawks, Howard made the movie Hatari, an African adventure film with John Wayne, also, who was in the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance for Ford as well. So Wayne was still a top star at that time, and Hatari was not Hawks' greatest movie, but a very successful movie at the box office, and really filmed on location in Africa, as many movies were being done at that time, filming overseas, not in Hollywood, which caused some distress among the Hollywood labor unions. They weren't getting as much work as so many films had been moved overseas. But yes, you had George Cukor, who had been active in 1939, also was working in 62. Not the greatest movie of his career, the Chapman Report, but an interesting movie in attempting to deal with sexuality in a novel and frank way. He was a little bit stymied by the censorship code, so that's one reason that the movie didn't come off as well as initially he had hoped, but it had a very good cast with Jane Fonda, Claire Bloom, Shelley Winters, and others. So, yes, it was a time when you had a mixture of these new talents, Sidney Lumet, John Frankenheimer, Kubrick, Sam Peckinpah, plus these veterans like Hawks and Ford who were working at the same time. So I think there was a very interesting cross-fertilization there among these talents from different generations, and that's something that made 62 a very stimulating year, I would think, for audiences at the time, and for those of us looking back at it now, to think it's amazing that all of those people were working at the same time. Plus, this new breed of international filmmakers who were absolutely mesmerizing audiences with a new kind of storytelling.
The part of the book that really I found so interesting is where you talk about the changing roles of women, both the young generation and the older generation. And there are two films that jumped right out at me, which I never really think of as being from 1962, but it's amazing when you do. One is Walk on the Wild Side, which the Eddie Dmytryk film, which is just so underrated, and the other one, obviously, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which is such a freak show, and the way that it recasts two legendary actresses whose feud was already legendary in equal measure with their own reputations. Talk about that subject and those two films in particular.
Yes, well, I mean, those two films in particular were interesting because it indicated that the problems that older actresses had in finding work at that time. Hollywood was very sexist and ageist then. It may still be, perhaps not quite as much. But A Walk on the Wild Side did have a couple of younger actresses in it. Jane Fonda, again, one of her early films, Capucine, but it was really Barbara Stanwyck who was playing the madam of this house of prostitution where Capucine was one of the employees. Stanwyck, who had not been seen on the big screen for a few years before this, really had one of the best roles, certainly of the latter part of her career, and playing a latent lesbian character, this madam of the house of prostitution who's in love with Capucine, and it's indirect but pretty clear to people watching it. So that was an indication how the production code was changing, and this movie was allowed to be made, recommended for adult audiences only. But Barbara Stanwyck, one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood history, had to take this supporting part because there weren't starring roles for her at that time. And Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, you had two of the biggest stars in Hollywood, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, who had not worked much in the last several years. They were not getting the kinds of parts that they had in the 30s and 40s and the early 50s because they were considered over the hill. That didn't inhibit people like John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart. They were still getting as many opportunities as ever, but the golden age female stars really were struggling for work. So Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was a very low-budget movie, under a $1 million budget, and it was not exactly as prestigious a project as some of the other movies that the two stars had done and won Academy Awards for, but they were desperate to work. And so they found this like horror novel about two sisters who were rivals, and one of them is crippled and the other one, played by Bette Davis, torments Joan Crawford, who's unable to walk. She's in a wheelchair. So it was not a prestige project like, as I say, some of the other movies that they had done, which were based on great novelists, Somerset Maugham, or playwrights, Lillian Hellman. This was considered sort of a freak show with these two older actresses involved in kind of a battle of wits and turning into like a horror movie. But it was so successful that it launched a whole genre of older actresses in horror films, and you saw a lot of others who weren't able to get work, like Olivia de Havilland and Tallulah Bankhead and Shelley Winters, who appeared in these kinds of, some people called them hagsploitation movies or grande dame guignol. In any case, it was all started by Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and it showed that the studio moguls who didn't have confidence that these older actresses would draw an audience were proven wrong, because Baby Jane turned out to be an enormous success, and made on a low budget. It really earned back its costs of under $1 million in like 10 days of release in the fall of 1962. So it shows that there were kind of blind spots and misjudgments on the part of the studios. And it shows that there was definitely sexism and ageism in the industry, that these actresses had to take very unconventional roles to keep their careers going.
One of the things that you illustrate, I'm sorry, wait.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that you illustrate in the book, Cinema 62, Stephen, so well, is how all of this was taking place across all of Hollywood. So in 62, we get the launch of Dr. No, the Bond series. In 62, we get Carnival of Souls, tiny little movie. And Orson Welles is in where was he when he made that movie, The Trial, outside the country. We get extraordinary cinema across the spectrum. If you could talk a little bit about how this was happening everywhere in Hollywood in 1962.
Well, I think because of the fact that the audiences had shrunk with the rise of television, and they didn't have the guaranteed grosses that they had in the 40s, when there were no alternative forms of entertainment, really. Therefore, being desperate can sometimes cause people to be more adventurous. And they figure, well, we have nothing to lose, so we might as well try some different kinds of movies. And they tried, yes, like a Carnival of Souls. I mean, a very, very low-budget movie that caught on maybe even more in subsequent years. But you also had John Huston made one of his dream projects, which was Freud, a biography of Sigmund Freud. The idea that a movie like that would be released by a major studio, Universal Pictures, is kind of mind-boggling, but it shows that they felt, we don't have that much to lose. I mean, here's a major filmmaker, John Huston, wants to do this movie. It's not going to be a big-budget movie. Why not try it? And it turned out not to be a box office success, but nonetheless, it was a pretty remarkable enterprise for a filmmaker of Huston's caliber to do this. This was a dream project of his, because he idolized Freud, and we may have different views today, but Freud was certainly a great thinker and influencer in many, many ways. And just the fact that this movie could be made and released by a studio was indicative of the fact that there were no rules that there had been in the past, and they were taking a lot of chances that they wouldn't have taken back in the 40s, when they were very confident of what audiences wanted to see. They no longer were confident about that, so a lot of experiments were undertaken, and we, the audience, were the beneficiaries of that.
Fascinating. It's just so fascinating. Well, Tim, unless you've got any other thoughts, I was going to wrap this up. You got any last questions?
It was just wonderful work, Stephen, and I can promise you I'll be using it in all my film classes henceforth and forever. Thank you, sir.
I agree. I think you guys did an amazing job. I mean, it leaves no stone unturned, and it is a wonderful, wonderful It's not just a great thesis; it's a great film history book generally, and I learned a lot from it, and I thank you for doing it. You guys did a great job.
Well, thank you for your support. I really appreciate the fact that you got a lot out of it, and that's very gratifying. So thank you for doing this and for supporting the book.
Of course. And so for our listeners, one more time, the book is Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies by Stephen Farber and Michael McClellan. And we would urge all of our listeners to make it a part of their film history libraries because it really is just so much fun. Thanks again, Stephen. Best of luck with the book.
Thanks a lot. Great to talk to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.